Monday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports for CLE. Thanks for joining us. Hope your weekend was a good one. The Browns' 2024 season came to a merciful end. 3-14 is the final record in the season. They will draft second in the NFL draft. Andrew Berry met with media today, had an update on Deshaun Watson.
Yesterday, as we went through our normal player, medical process, we did learn that he did have a setback in his, Achilles recovery. We don't have all the details and everything yet, but it obviously extend the recovery process for him. It is new information, just learned in the past couple hours, so I don't have everything yet, but did want to make you all aware of it before opening up for questions. So with that, I'll leave it to you all.
As far as Deshaun's concerned, does that take him out of the running for next year, or how does that impact him coming into camp?
Yeah, Tom, it's too early to tell. I don't have all the information. Obviously, in a situation like that, I don't want to. One thing I'd say I have learned from this year, I don't want to rule out anything with a major injury. We are still collecting all the information, and then obviously our focus is making sure that he can get as healthy as possible.
So this is the counterpoint to that. The Browns have $44.3 million of Watson's 2025 salary insured for injury, so there would be some financial relief if he is unable to play because of the Achilles injury that he suffered this year, that from over the cap. The other thing, there is no minor injury to an Achilles without question. Let's welcome in Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram, as well as brownzone.com. And Scott, these are Achilles injuries. You just never know. It controls the movement of all of your leg without question.
Yeah, it's a serious injury. I think we get so accustomed, Dave, to guys get hurt and guys come back. And there's a lot of gray area in between. And that includes setbacks and taking longer than expected and all those things. So obviously this falls in that category. Who knows how long it's going to delay Watson from coming back? Does it keep him out of training camp? Does it keep him out of the season? I asked Andrew Berry if Watson was going to need a second surgery, and he said it was too early to tell. But obviously, if he needed a second surgery, that further delays any kind of timetable for a return. So it's big news, and I'm sure we'll get into the whole quarterback situation, but it adds another level of uncertainty to what was already a pretty uncertain spot for the Browns.
Yeah, and again, he doesn't have any information. You asked him. He kept getting peppered with Deshaun Watson injury, and he just didn't have the information. All right, Browns finished 3-14. They were expected to be a playoff team, contend for the Super Bowl. Sticking with the head coach and general manager, Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski talked about the season and where they're headed in the offseason.
We feel very responsible, and we are tied at the hip, and we will do everything in our power together. Andrew works really, really hard at this. I'm sure you guys will talk to Andrew. I'll let him speak for himself, but we're frustrated, and we will get it fixed.
Sit here in front of you with a season where we just won 3 games, and I really share in our fans' disappointment, frustration. Quite honestly, I'm embarrassed with the results that we've had as a team this year. Just plainly put, we didn't meet expectations. Our decisions coming into the year didn't meet expectations. And ultimately, that responsibility lies at my feet.
Scott, you can't argue with anything that they said. When you look at it, they tried to switch offensive systems, and it was not good.
No, and there's a million things that went wrong. And I think they're right when they say, it's not one person, it's not one thing. I did appreciate the fact that Andrew Berry went to embarrassed. That's more than usually here. You get the disappointment, you get the frustration. To say embarrassed, I thought was him taking it another step, justifiably so, to talk about some of the decisions that he in particular made that didn't work out. And a lot of those are roster decisions that, the roster I thought was a playoff caliber roster, certainly, and it did not turn out that way. And He's in charge of the roster. So I was glad that he at least acknowledged that. But to your point about the offensive system, we talked about it so much heading into this year. And it was understandable why the Browns tried to maximize Deshaun Watson's skill set. We saw him try to fit in the Kevin Stefanski system, and it wasn't a great fit. So they went all in on Deshaun Watson, 2024, spread it out, shotgun, RPOs, quarterback runs, all those things. And it was an abject failure with Watson. And then certain things got better without Watson, and they kind of reverted to the old Stefanski scheme. But the bottom line is that offensive switch really hurt the Browns. And, it contributed to the 23 interceptions that was a league high. And obviously the quarterback play did as well, but they didn't have that running game to fall back on because they went so pass heavy, and there was a trickle down effect from that affected the whole offense, which in turn affected the entire team.
All right, so shortly after the game, offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey, offensive line coach Andy Dickerson fired by the Browns after just one season. Kevin Stefanski talked about the decision to move off of both of those two coaches after just one season.
Bottom line, I want to go in a different direction. We need to improve, as everybody knows, on the offensive side of the ball, and that's what we plan to do.
Do you feel like you guys got away from maybe what you did best and what this team has built best to do this season?
We certainly didn't play well enough, Dan, so I think it's something that we need to look at, and we need to look at doing those things as a team, certainly doing those things as an offense that give you a chance to win.
Players were talking, Kevin, that the philosophy just wasn't working. So could you sense that? And then as you as head coach, could you have said, wait, we have to go back to what we were doing, or is that just not that simple?
I think bottom line, the results were not there, Jeff. And we all share in that, and there's things that we have to improve, there's things that we have to fix, and that's what we'll do.
So, Scott, they couldn't run the ball, which had been a staple of what we had grown accustomed. And again, they brought Ken Dorsey in because mobile quarterback, shotgun, it didn't work. So I can't find fault with moving on from either of these. Now, if you don't move back to what Kevin Stefanski does well, it's a head scratcher because he knew how to fix things when they were going wrong. You didn't have prolonged losing streaks when he was running the type of offense that he ran. This whole season was a prolonged losing streak, which tells you he didn't know how to fix the offense that they were trying to run.
Yeah, I partially agree with that. When Winston was playing and they went back to a lot of the under center, drop back, bootleg, play action stuff, they moved the ball. He just threw way too many interceptions. But I agree that Stefanski wasn't in a position to fix, let's call it the Ken Dorsey scheme, right? That was implemented, which was RPOs and all those things we mentioned. I think it makes all the sense in the world to go back to what Kevin Stefanski has had so much success with. And we saw work in 2020 and, to varying degrees in 21 and 22 and 23. So that just makes sense to me. You talk to Joe Bitonio, who I highly respect, Jack Conklin, who I respect, and they said the same thing. They talked about going back to the wide zone scheme, heavy play action. They think it's a strength of Kevin Stefanski's. They think the offensive line is better suited to run that than what they were doing this year. Bitonio mentioned this year he thinks he had 8 or 10. He pulled 8 or 10 times all year, when formerly he would do that. He would pull 8 or 10 times in a game. And Wyatt Teller's the same way, and that's what they do really well. So that makes sense. I understand when Stefanski wants to be vague about it and talk about, as long as you're sound and explosive, that's what matters. And I agree with that. I think you can win with a bunch of different schemes. What makes most sense for the Browns with Kevin Stefanski as coach and potentially play caller again is to go back to that Shanahan, Kubiak, under center, play action, bootleg scheme.
Yeah, and again, you do what you know, because when you when you get into a tough spot, you know, okay, this is what, if this is happening, here's what, they didn't have those adjustments, and it was frustrating.
Well, real quick, Dave, I thought Jack Conklin made a great point when he said you can't build around one guy. And that's what they did with Watson. And I understand if he's a franchise quarterback, but Watson isn't. And when he's out of the game, which he has been so many times, or out of the lineup, then you're stuck with a system that doesn't fit the other guys.
Yeah, that is a great point by Jack Conklin. All right, this is concerning. Most divisional last place finishes in the NFL since 1999 when the Browns returned. So the Browns have been last in the division 17 times. Now, again, this only covers 25 years. That's kind of frightening, and you see that's 8 more than the Commanders. The Lions were there at double figures in 10. Now they've won back-to-back AFC, or NFC Norths, rather. The Jets, Cardinals, and the Raiders also on that list. But, man, when you see that I knew the Browns had struggled since they've returned. When you see that, it's like, oh, wow.
Yeah, I struggle with some of those stats from '99 because they are so bad. And you don't want to, I don't want to rub the fans or the readers in it too much. They know how bad it's been. But sometimes it helps to crystallize things. I think it helps when you talk about Bailey Zappi being the 4th or the 40th quarterback. That number just hits you, and it's from '99. So, yeah, I mean, they've been awful. They were bad at the beginning. They were bad in the middle. They obviously have been better lately. That's why this season, and we've talked about it before on here, that's why this season has felt so bad and has been so disappointing and frustrating and embarrassing for the Browns, for the fans, for their players. You hear Myles Garrett and Joe Bitonio say that it's worse than 0-16 in 2017. It's because it had been a while since they'd been this bad, and they'd been to the playoffs, and they'd won 7 games under Stefanski and whatever. This was such a drop-off no one saw coming, and with what they thought was a bunch of talent coming off the playoffs, it just stung even worse.
Yeah, and I agree. We thought this was a playoff team that had a chance to make a run deep in the AFC, and instead they're picking second in the draft in the spring. Scott Patrick and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, we'll head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports4CLE, will be right back.
Ted.
Hi, Betty.
Oh no, you wrapped yourself into a daze.
Holidays.
You need a break, so I got you Ohio Lotteries Home for the Holidays and Merry Money Scratch-Offs.
You could win up to $500,000 or $1 million. Oh, thanks, hon.
And they have games on the back. Has anybody seen my glasses?
We continue talking Browns with Scott Petrick from the Chronicle Telegram as well as BrownZone.com. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey, love the show. Just have a quick question for you. If the Browns happen to move off some of their star players for draft capital, because it's going into a rebuild, and you get a couple extra first-round picks, do you actually trust Andrew Berry to make the right picks? Because he hasn't seemed to be very good when it comes to draft picks. I mean, he's maybe got 2 guys that were actually decent. And like I said, he's only got 1 Pro Bowl out of all the picks, and he keeps trading back. But I'm just saying, do you trust him to hold on to them picks and keep them, or would you expect him to trade out of them like he always seems to do? Just want to hear your thoughts. Go Browns.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Scott, I'm in a dwindling minority. Again, I understand some of the criticism of Andrew Berry's drafts. The one Jedrick Wills, you can point to, okay. Didn't have a lot of first-round picks, and they kind of felt like they were in the mode of really, really competing. You draft a little differently when you're in that mode. If there is not a quarterback or a guy that makes a difference that you really like, I don't have a problem with dropping back as long as you're in the top 10 and getting an offensive tackle or somebody that you think can be a cornerstone.
Yeah, there's a lot there. First of all, I don't think they're going to do the tear down like the caller suggests. Andrew Berry today talked about he doesn't think he's going to part with the cornerstones. So if you're going to do a teardown, then you trade a guy like Myles Garrett. You think about trading a guy like Denzel Ward. And Andrew Berry gave no indication that was the case. I don't think the Haslam's have the stomach for that type of a rebuild. So I don't think you're going to see that. Regardless, if you make those moves or not, you have the number 2 pick in the draft. And whether or not you trust Andrew Berry, to me, that might be the biggest question facing this organization. And it's from can you evaluate the quarterbacks properly, whether that's in the draft or free agency? And can you hit on enough draft picks? And I get what you're saying, Dave. And he hasn't had a ton of high picks, and not having those 3 first-round picks because of the Watson trade obviously skew his draft resume. But it's not good. He's drafted 5 years, and I think I wrote about it last week. I want to say 37 picks. And I came up with maybe 6 good ones. And I know that the hit rate gets much smaller as you go deeper in the draft, but there's not a whole lot of picks that Andrew Berry can hang his hat on. So it doesn't matter if I trust him to make those picks or not. The Haslam's are, and the key is he has to hit this year because they have the number 2 pick. They have a pick it high in the 2nd round. There's a chance to jumpstart this turnaround that they hope takes them to the playoffs in 2025. So they have the capital. They need to maximize that capital. And I would not be surprised if they traded down. That's in their history. That's part of who they are. And right now, I would lean toward sticking at number 2, but that's like a 55-45. And we're so far away. It's just you're number 2. You need a quarterback. My first instinct is you sit at number 2 and take a quarterback, but there's a million questions to be answered before that.
Yeah, when you're drafting that high, you can't miss. You flat out can't miss. Myles Garrett was 1st overall pick. Denzel Ward was 4th. You need that kind of player if you are drafting in the top 5. You have to get them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And if you sit at 2, is it, again, this is way early. If it's a quarterback, it's a quarterback. If it's not, is it Travis Hunter? And you got to figure it out, but maybe he's the best player in the draft. Is it a left tackle? Do you get a pass rusher to pair with Myles Garrett, which, they've gone these veteran guys, whether it's free agency or trade the last several years. Do you go younger there? Or do you trade back? And then that opens it up to defensive tackle, wide receiver, whatever. And you add more, you add another number 1 pick, or you add a 2nd and a 3 in this draft, whatever it is. There's going to be a billion options, but what can't happen is you blow the number 2 pick, or you trade down and blow those picks like we saw the Browns do, so many times, especially before Andrew Berry, right? Sashi Brown would trade out. I remember trading out of that number 2 pick in 2016. They trade back again, and they wind up taking Corey Coleman, right? So you can't have that happen.
No, absolutely not. All right, so Nick Chubb becomes a free agent. This from Jack Duffin, who is a salary cap guy. Expect Nick Chubb to receive a 4-year qualifying contract to return to Cleveland for 2025. Roughly gets $3 million. Only $1.5 million ever lands on the salary cap. Used it for Taki. H.J. Dillon got it for the Jets in the past. Again, I would expect if they can find a way to bring Nick Chubb back, and it's not crazy relative to the salary cap they do, I would also think they probably draft a running back somewhere in the top 4 rounds.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think you take a running back crazy high, and 2 probably takes it out of the equation. But even at the top 10, I think that's too high personally. And I think the Browns decision makers would agree with that. I don't think Andrew Berry ever envisions himself drafting a guy in the top 10. But do you need to add to Jerome Ford? And even if Nick Chubb comes back, certainly. And I would think you would do that with a draft pick. And you can find, that's the thing, you can find running backs that are successful in the mid to late rounds. So if that guy's in the 4th round or the 5th round, he can still come in and have an impact. We've seen that time and again in this league. When it comes to Chubb, I would still think that they get a deal done. I mean, every time Nick Chubb has talked, he talks about finishing his career here. I think it makes sense to think he'll be better in year 2 coming off the knee, the major knee reconstruction. But the way Andrew Berry talked about it today made me pause. They were so adamant and confident last year that something would get worked out. And yes, Chubb was under contract, but they were going to restructure. He was not coming back for that contract. And now he's a free agent. Maybe he's gotten a sense from Chubb that Chubb wants to test the market, or that Chubb, whatever, isn't happy with how things are going here, whatever it is. So I would lean heavily toward Chubb comes back. But I would have leaned much more heavily that direction before listening to Andrew talk today.
All right. Well, along those lines, second year in a row, his season has ended with an injury, being Nick Chubb. This one, a broken foot. Andrew Berry was asked about Nick Chubb's future with the Browns.
I think everybody in this room knows how much respect that we have for Nick and how much appreciation we have for, not just like his exploits on the field, but who he is in the locker room and who he is as a person. It's always a challenging situation when, one of your cornerstone players, their contract is up. That's probably maybe a little bit the different situation, this year relative to last, where there is maybe perhaps a little bit, less control on the club side with it. Those are all decisions that we do have to work through in the next several weeks. We love Nick. He's going to be a Ring of Honor player for us, and we know that. In terms of the short term, that's something that, quite honestly, we just have to work through over the next several weeks.
And again, that's much less certain than it sounds the similar way, with Deshaun Watson. They were saying last year, Deshaun Watson's our guy, Deshaun Watson. Now it's, we have to wait and see.
Yeah, and, maybe that's as simple as they don't think his knee's going to be good enough. And they watched him for however many 8 games he's played this year, I think, and thought, okay, that explosion's not there. Maybe they want to go super cheap at running back. Again, maybe they talk to Nick and they get a sense of that from Nick. I don't know. But if they, in fact, go back to a more, not run first, but run heavy scheme, you would think that fits Nick Chubb. So that's why I was kind of taken aback by those comments. I thought Andrew would be stronger on a Nick Chubb return.
All right, you wrote an article. Denzel Ward wants to Shaq and Kobe stick together along with Myles Garrett. Take us through that article. And it's got, fans are getting a little worked up that Myles said, he wants to see the plan, and Ward said this. When you're 3-14 and you've played a number of years in the league, you don't want to go back to rebuilds. I completely understand what both of these guys are thinking.
Oh, for sure. And it's interesting because Denzel has said that he wants to be here regardless of the plan. And, he could change his mind on that too, but he kind of drew a distinction with Garrett, who said, I need to see the plan. I'm not going to go through a rebuild. Now, Andrew Berry said today he was pretty strong. Myles is going to be, go from Cleveland to Canton, thinks he's going to be here for his whole career. And, I think the whole plan to not go in a tear down, not go huge rebuild, will probably be enough to satisfy Myles, especially when you throw in what I would expect to be a giant extension for Myles Garrett. So that makes sense. But those two guys, they're the cornerstone of your defense. And when you talk about, I think there's a big segment of the fan base that kind of wants to see this big rebuild. And, hey, they can't win right away and, blow it all up. When you have guys like Garrett and Ward, I think you're partially there to being able to win. You got 2 top, whatever. Myles is the best defensive player in the league. Denzel's a top 2 or 3 corner in the league. If you have those guys, I think the strongest organizations figure out a way to build around those guys as opposed to trying to build for later by getting rid of those guys. I understand the thought process. I just don't agree with it. I think you have 2 cornerstones that you can build around. And really on defense, you probably only need 4 or 5. And if JOK comes back, he's one of them, right? And you can figure out a way to get to imagine that defense being a top 5 defense again because you have those 2 guys. And Denzel wants to see them together. He said, I can't imagine not having Myles with him. And Myles has been here his whole career. And I think, personally, it's vital to keep those 2 guys.
Scott Patrick and I can step aside, take another quick timeout. On the side of the break, we'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Scott Petrak from the Chronicle Telegram as well as brownzone.com. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey, Dave, couple things for you today, brother. As far as today's game against the Ravens, we got closure on two things. The season's finally over, and there's no one worthy of bringing back in that quarterback room besides Jameis Winston as a backup. As far as the draft, the two kids from Colorado, Deion's son and the other kid, I won't even touch them kids because Deion's already said he's going to be in the mix wherever they go and everything. You don't need all that baggage. I say we take the kid out of Arizona, the wide receiver, McMillan, I believe. That's about it, Dave. I'll be in touch. God bless you, brother. I love you, man. Bye.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Scott, relative to the quarterback, you got to evaluate them, and if one of them you think can be the answer, you make them the answer. If not, I don't mind trying to find a playmaking wide receiver up high in the draft. Browns haven't taken a wide receiver since Corey Coleman in the first round.
Yeah, I'm with you about the quarterback. If you think there's a chance that the guy can be the guy, the long-term answer, the franchise quarterback, I would take him. Even if you're not 100% sure, right? If it's not a Peyton Manning or Andrew Luck or whoever that guy is, even if you have some questions, but you think this guy has special talent, I say you take a chance on it. You don't draft in the top 2 or 3 very often. But if you don't like the guy, you can't force it, right? So if that doesn't happen, it opens up the possibilities of what position you address. I think number 2 is too high for receiver. And maybe that's just me. I know Calvin Johnson was number 2. Marvin Harrison Jr. went pretty high. I think he's number 4. So I get that, you could take a receiver that high. But I don't know, it just feels a little lower to me. Like, that just feels a touch too high for me for a receiver. And I actually wouldn't put receiver that high on the Browns' list of needs. I know they need help there. But you have Jerry Jeudy. Whether or not he's a number 1 or number 2, we could fight about that. You need to augment that for sure. I just don't know if I would do that with the number 2 pick.
If not a quarterback, what would you be willing to? Because I don't think you like the tackles aren't ranked that high. The offensive tackles aren't ranked that high. It's not going to be a running back. What position would be worthy of a second pick, you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. If it's not quarterback, I think left tackle in general is worth taking that high. We saw Joe Thomas go number 3. I don't know about this draft specifically, but just positions. I like left tackle. I like pass rusher. I like defensive tackle. And then corner receiver would be next. And I'd have to be talked into those positions at number 2. And maybe if it's the cornerback / receiver, maybe that moves it up where it's okay to take that guy at number 2.
All right, Andrew Berry talked about this year's roster and how different it will look and how different the approach will be moving forward.
I think it would be naive to suggest that there won't be turnover in different rooms. Like, our goal is to make the decisions necessary to make improvements both in the short term and the long term foundation of the team. We do have guys that we like that will be a part of both, but there are going to have to be some changes that we do make with the team.
Scott, it's one of the things that's really difficult is the DeJuan Jones that is on the roster. Is he like DeJuan Jones from 2 years ago or DeJuan Jones this year? And I know he was hurt. Is MJ Emerson the guy we saw the first 2 years, or is he the guy we saw this year? There are young guys who have flashed, man, these guys are good, and then it was like, maybe not as good as we thought.
Yeah, I think those are the perfect examples, Chud. And maybe you throw. I know he's not even going to be here, but Jed Wills, right? You saw flashes. Obviously, this year was not what you wanted. The injuries. Um, David Njoku took a step back. A lot of that was injuries as well. But Andrew Berry today talked about the best players. Some of the best players didn't play up to the level that the Browns expected, and I would think Njoku's in that category. I would think Martin Emerson Jr. is certainly in that category. That's where your internal evaluations have to be accurate. And they have to say, okay, yes, MJ will get back to the player he was. Yes, DeJuan Jones will get back to the player we think he can be. Because even as a rookie, he was good, but he got hurt. He didn't finish the season. That was a small sample size. So, when you're talking about roster changes, it changes every year, but it certainly should change after 3 and 14. You have to have an honest look at the guys on your team. Are they really as good as you thought they were? Was a step back this year an aberration, or is that who they really are? That's what they have to figure out, and that's going to lead to significant roster change, which you would expect given 3 and 14.
Yeah, that again, everything's on the table when you only win 3 games in an NFL season. All right, so this from ESPN offseason outlook for every team eliminated from the NFL playoffs. Biggest for the Browns, biggest offseason priority. Searching for a solution at quarterback, Cleveland's decision makers have not committed to Watson being the starter when he returns from Achilles tear. $72.9 million cap hit. He likely will return in some capacity. Can the Browns find competition, a potential upgrade in the draft or free agency? All fair questions. That was before we found out the update to the injury. You know what? You can't rely on bringing in one veteran because you don't have. Is Jameis Winston a guy coming back? I don't know. I would search wide and far, and I'd bring in a couple of guys who'd been in the league a couple of years, a guy that hasn't gotten a shot. And these are just random names. Kirk Cousins, bring in Justin Fields. If the Steelers want to move on from Russell Wilson, take a look at him. You have to have a number of opportunities and candidates, hoping that one of them, right time, right place.
I agree with that. And I do think the Watson injury news today, even though it's still nebulous, could lead to the Browns not even considering him. Right? We heard talk about he's going to compete, and we knew he was coming back because of the money they owe him, and you expected him to take up one of those 3 quarterback spots. Let's say that's off the table. So then it leaves it wide open. Yes, DTR comes back, at least in training camp, just because he's under contract for 2 more years. Winston, I think, played his way out of town. So to me, it's wide open. And I think you pair at least one veteran, but you're right, probably 2, with a draft pick. And that draft pick doesn't have to be number 2. It could be 2nd round. It could be 3rd round. But you have a young guy, at least you think has a chance. And then you pair him with, like you said, maybe it's Kirk Cousins, whoever that guy is. Maybe Derek Carr comes free, what have you. What I think's interesting is you threw Justin Fields in there. And I really liked him last year coming out of Chicago. Then he goes to Pittsburgh and he gets benched. And, I kind of soured on him a bit. My point is, if you're going back to the Stefanski scheme, then you need a quarterback that is fluent in that. And you're not trying to force a running quarterback to read the defense and to sit in the pocket. So I think you have to be careful with all these evaluations, free agency, trade, draft, is to find the quarterbacks that fit what the Browns are going to do. And I'm assuming that's going to go back to that Stefanski thing. And if it is, then you got to find the guys that fit. So you have the right guys in the room. If one of them gets hurt, whatever, it's not switching back and forth between styles of quarterback.
Fair enough. Absolutely fair. This is also from that same article, under the radar priority in the offseason for the Browns. Overhaul an offensive line that regressed in 2024. Jedrick Wills Jr., 2020 first-round pick, free agent. Joel Bitonio, 33, pondering retirement. Teller, Posick, Conklin, no guaranteed money remaining on their contracts. The line played a little bit better later in the year. I liked Conklin. I thought Conklin was good. The question is, can he stay healthy? But yeah, the offensive line got old, and offensive lines never age gracefully in the NFL. Those guys get the crap beat out of them every snap.
Yeah, I did think there was an uptick toward the end of the year when the guys got healthy, when things were more stable. They need a left tackle, and we talked about DeJuan Jones. I think the way you approach it is you bring back Conklin, and you probably have to rework his contract, but you bring back Conklin, you have DeJuan Jones, and you draft a left tackle and say those are the 3 guys for 2 spots. And we talked about it so much last year, thinking it was Conklin, Wills, and Jones, and then none of them wind up playing for a while, right? So 3 for 2 makes sense to me. And if DeJuan Jones winds up being in great shape and healthy and is the stud, then that's fine. And you put him at right tackle and you figure that out later or whatever. But I would still draft the left tackle high. And then, you hope Joe Bitonio comes back because I still think he was playing well. You bring back Wyatt Teller. You figure out center. I thought Ethan Posick regressed some this year, so you could see a change there. And I would also say that if they do go back to that wide scheme like we talked about earlier, then you probably see better performances from Wyatt Teller and Joe Bitonio and even Ethan Posick. Those guys are at their best in that scheme, and maybe part of this is, okay, let's see if we can maximize those guys again with this scheme as opposed to overhauling the roster. You overhaul the scheme instead.
So that same article, Draft Outlook, they say the Browns need to find a young franchise quarterback, but bolstering the wide receiver room could be in play as well. Arizona's Tetiara McMillan, 6'5" playmaker, kind of like the Falcons wide receiver Drake London, would immediately lift the Cleveland offense. They had only 18 touchdown receptions for the entire crew. So that's interesting. And we've already talked about that. Again, I'm with you. If you don't like either of these guys as a franchise quarterback, take a developmental guy. You're gonna have extra picks, and you're drafting high. A third-round pick that's second overall is really like a second-round pick. So you're gonna have the ability to find one of those guys in the second, third, fourth round, and if you like them, make sure you have a guy that you can develop him in front of him.
Yes, you have to take a swing and a miss. Not a miss. You have to take a big swing. You have to take a big swing at some point, whether it's 2 or 33 or wherever, in third round, whatever that is. You have to take a swing at that important position. But I think even if it's number 2, you have to pair it with a veteran that can start right away. So you give yourself flexibility. So it's not all about this rookie quarterback, because the reality is, if we talk about not tearing down and not rebuilding, you have guys getting older. You have a Myles Garrett at 29. You got to have a chance to win. Nobody wants to go into the season going, it's all about a rookie that isn't ready. So that's why you need options, and not just options out there, options on your roster.
Scott Petrick and I are going to step aside, take one more time out. Other side of the break, we'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. We'll look at some of the free agents that are out there. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. We continue talking Browns with Scott Petrak from the Chronicle Telegram, BrownsZone.com. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hi, Dave. Great show. Howard from Marin. I have one question. The city of Cleveland and Mr. Haslam are going to fight over the Modell rule. What happens if they go to court and the Modell rule is found unconstitutional and they still mad at each other? Maybe Jimmy would say, the hell with Cleveland. I'm going to move to a completely different city. That's my question. What would the probability be that Mr. Haslam would just move the team out of the area if he doesn't get his way? I really can't conceive that the state legislature is going to give Jimmy $1 billion to build his palace. So curious what you would say or what your guest would say. Have a great day. Thanks.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Scott, first of all, they're fighting the semantics of the Modell rule would be you can't move from Cleveland to Brook Park. The Modell rule does say you can't move from Cleveland to, I don't know, fill in the blank. But a guy that wants to dump $1 billion into developing a portion of Northeast Ohio, I don't think he has any ideas of moving out of the region.
Yeah, I've not only never gotten that indication, they have been adamant over and over that they're committed to Northeast Ohio, that they would never move the team. So I think you need to take them at their word on that. I get that there's, if you want to not trust the Haslams, they've given you a reason not to trust them. But they have been overboard about that. I do get the caller's concern. I read the entire lawsuit that the Browns filed about the Modell law, and it certainly feels like they are poking holes in it left and right, that it's not constitutional, that it's too broadly written, that to me it actually read like a way for teams to move teams out of cities. So I think they would probably win that lawsuit. Not that I'm any kind of lawyer or legal expert. And then I think they probably would have the freedom to move wherever they wanted. I just don't think they will.
All right, so these are the top 50 free agents entering 2025 via PFF. Number 1, wide receiver T. Higgins from the Cincinnati Bengals. 4th on this list, Chris Godwin, wide receiver from the Buccaneers. He's coming off a significant injury that he missed most of the year. 20th on this list, an interesting name as well, Aaron Jones, 74 PFF grade, 4th among running backs, consistent rushing and receiving production to boot. He's currently playing with the Vikings. I can't see the Browns spending, $40 million on T. Higgins. I might be wrong, but Godwin's coming off of injury. Jones is intriguing. I would assume the Vikings want him back. He's been really productive, part of a team that was playing for the NFC North Championship last night.
Yeah, Jones feels like too much money to me. I don't think the Browns are going to invest heavily from a free agent standpoint there. Maybe they get, and I think we saw last year, the top of the market was heavy, but then there were veteran guys that you could sign pretty cheap as free agency went along. I would think the Browns either go draft a running back or go more that way than top of the market running back. T. Higgins fascinates me because you're taking a guy away from a division rival. We know Joe Burrow loves him. He's a big guy. I think he would fit with Jerry Jeudy and Sid Tillman. I just don't know if they would spend that money or they have that money to spend. But he's an interesting one because, I said we don't know if Judy's a 1 or a 2, and we don't. And I'm not sure we know if Higgins is a 1 or a 2. But together they could be good. I just think that we know they need to add to that room. I just think how you view Jerry Jeudy kind of affects how you go about adding to that room. Does it have to be a huge splash, or can you build kind of a bunch of guys around a Jerry Jeudy?
Yeah, and the other thing that figures into that, what's your evaluation of Cedric Tillman? Flashes, but again, small sample size.
Yeah, there's a ton of disappointing things in this season, but I think one of them was he started to flash, like you mentioned, when DTR played after Watson went out in that Bengals game, and then with Jameis Winston for those few weeks, and he really showed up, and then he gets hurt. So you don't know if that was just an aberration or if you can count on him to be, a legitimate number 3 in this league, let's say. Because if you did know that, if he finished the season on kind of on a tear, then you could go, okay, you got Jeudy, you got Tillman, fill in the blanks. But to me, Tillman is still a huge question mark.
Scott Petrak, as always, appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Scott.
Thanks, David.
Scott Petrick, make sure you check him out. Browns beat reporter for the Chronicle Telegram. On the internet, you can find him brownzone.com. Always really good stuff. We're going to turn our attention to the Ohio State Buckeyes getting ready to face Texas in a college football playoff semifinal. Stephen Means, Buckeyes beat reporter from Plain Deal, cleveland.com. Straight ahead. Stay with us.
Head.
Hi, Betty.
Oh no, you wrapped yourself into a daze.
Holidays.
You need a break, so I got you Ohio Lotteries home for the holidays and Merry Money Scratch-Offs.
You could win up to $500,000 or $1 million. Oh, thanks, hon.
And they have games on the back. Has anybody seen my glasses?
We turn our attention to the Ohio State Buckeyes getting ready to face Texas in what will be the Cotton Bowl semifinal. So the winner of it will play for the national championship. Let's welcome in Stephen Means, Cleveland.com's Buckeyes beat reporter as well as plain dealer. And Stephen, we had talked prior to the Oregon game. What really stood out to you in that win over Oregon for Ohio State?
So going into that game, I was asking myself the question of, okay, Ohio State's defense has a lot of NFL players on it, and they didn't play like NFL players the first time they played Oregon on October 12th. And they lost by 1 point in the game. They still could have won at the end there. So what happens if their NFL players start playing like NFL players? Well, I wasn't including Jeremiah Smith amongst those NFL players, but he looks pretty good. But also this defense has really turned a corner in the second half of the season. And so that's what I saw. I saw an offense whose entire game plan is, we have number 4. Let's see if you can stop him, in a defense that it's very hard to move the ball on. And you put those two things together and you, in a blink of an eye, it's 21-0 at the end of the first quarter against Tennessee. It's 17-0 at the end of the first quarter against Oregon, and then you just never take your foot off the gas after that. And I'm not really sure what team out there is supposed to have an answer for that.
Yeah, the other thing is, so when you get the ball to Smith and, you know, their wide receiving core, now you've got to deal with Henderson and Judkins too, who they're effective, but they're more effective when you get the ball to your playmakers in space, and then once they spread out a little bit, now those two gash you.
It sounds so logical, right? You're right. You get the ball to your best players, and then it allows everybody else to do what they need to do. Granted, there is a world Ohio State could have lived in this year where they started games off by establishing the run and then building off the pass from that. But once their offensive line went to, you know what, just because of a lot of injuries, that has to change. And so it's been good to see Ohio State understand that, given what happened against Michigan, and now they're doing the opposite. They're establishing Jeremiah Smith, they're establishing Emeka Egbuka, and then you're starting to see them establish Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, because it opens that up as well. Because then once you have both of those things working in tandem and you have that balance that they're always searching for, plus a defense that's not giving up any points for the first quarter and a half of a game, that's a hard hole for anybody to climb out of.
So the other thing is Texas, led by Quinn Ewers, who was at Ohio State to begin his college career. What are your thoughts just on Ewers and what you've seen from him?
Yeah, that was a crazy roller coaster of a ride. He was originally their 2022 quarterback commit. NIL came into play, and so he reclassifies to 2021, shows up 2 weeks in the fall camp, heading into the 2021 season. He's the 4th quarterback in a room with C.J. Stroud, Kyle McCord, and Jack Miller. Spends 4 months on campus and then transfers to Texas, where he's been their starting quarterback ever since. I think when you watch him on film, you see why everybody hyped him coming out of high school. But you also are left with a lot of question marks of, yeah, but why hasn't it clicked consistently yet? Why isn't it there yet? Why don't I think he's the clear-cut #1 pick in the 2025 NFL draft? Why is he not in the Heisman Trophy conversation? Why am I not all the way sure that this guy is the best quarterback playing in the Cotton Bowl on Friday and not Will Howard. It's just something's not all the way there with Quinn Ewers in a way that he doesn't scare you. Excuse me, he doesn't scare you. You see the talent, you see some opportunities, you see some throws he makes every so often where it's like, okay, that's what everybody loved, but it's not consistent enough for it to necessarily put fear in you the way that you maybe think it should.
And the flip side of it is Steve Sarkisian is a guy who usually gets a lot out of his quarterback. So it makes it even more puzzling and head scratching.
Yeah, I think he is though. I think he's. This is so weird. I think he's maximizing Quinn Ewers, but I don't think Quinn Ewers has been maximized, and that's such a head scratcher of a thing to say. But I think that's just where it is. We're 4 years into Quinn Ewers being a college football player, 3 years into him being a starting quarterback, and yet for whatever reason, we're all like not content with he is what he is at this point. But I think Steve Sarkisian runs an offense that is, to an extent, QB friendly in terms of keeping them out of harm's way, allowing them to have easy throws to make. And I do think Quinn Ewers does do that. But now we're into the semifinal of the college football playoff. Your quarterback has to be a little bit more than that. And the question is, do you believe Quinn Ewers can be that for Texas?
Well, the other thing, Texas head coach Steve Sarkisian has to do is he has to figure out how to try to slow down what we talked about with Ohio State's outstanding offense. Sarkisian was asked what the Texas defense needs to do against the Buckeyes.
Well, I think we've got to be really good at the line of scrimmage against the run and the pass. The Ohio State's similar to us that way. When they have balance, they're very difficult. And so we've got to be good against the run. We got to try to affect him in the pocket. And we need to disrupt timing in the back end. We need to disguise our coverage as well. We need to be sticky in coverage. We need to get hands on footballs. We need to make throwing lanes difficult. We need to get our hands up at the line of scrimmage. So there's a lot of factors to that. Not an easy task, I'll say that, but one that I think is going to be necessary if we want to be successful.
Steven, Texas has a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball, but both previous playoff games, you were wondering, are they going to hang on?
Yeah, and that's why I don't think Texas has played a complete game yet this year, and so now you're asking, are they going to be able to finally flip that switch against a team who has just spent the last 2 weeks playing complete games and doesn't look like it's slowing down anytime soon? Will Howard talked about Texas's defense they play a lot of zone, so they kind of sit there and force you to march your way up the field and not make mistakes, but they try to bait you as a quarterback into making mistakes, which is why this is statistically the best pass defense in the country, 5.5 yards allowed per attempt. And they've got 21 interceptions to only 8 touchdowns allowed this season. And a lot of that is because they bait quarterbacks into making mistakes. Will Howard hasn't made any mistakes the last 2 weeks. His only turnover was a throw to Jeremiah Smith in the back of the end zone where a Tennessee defensive back had to make a pretty darn good play for it to be an interception. And quite frankly, Jeremiah Smith still could have came down with the ball. No one's faulting Will Howard for that. If Will Howard is going to be what we've seen for the last 2 weeks, and not the quarterback we saw against Michigan, not the quarterback we saw in the first half against Penn State, who does make those mistakes, then it's going to be very difficult for Texas to get after him and to pressure him and to rattle him if he's not making those mistakes. They are banking on you to make mistakes as an offense. Ohio State just hasn't done that in a couple of weeks since the playoffs started.
So the other thing, Texas hasn't been able to run the football really in either of their playoff games. Ryan Day was asked about and then talked about the Texas run game.
I look at their offensive line, the coaches, their running backs, and I know that they're very, very talented. They're very good. So we're going to have to be at our best. I know that. And they're always looking for balance. Again, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Sark and the way that he designs his offenses, the way he calls the game. So our defensive staff is going to be working around the clock to put a great plan together. And then our players in terms of executing the plan. And that's what's most important as we head into this week and focusing on the process. We know when we get to this point in the playoffs, we're going to be playing against great players and great scheme. And we know that, this offense has a chance to be very, very explosive. So we got to get back to work this week and focus on the game plan, make sure that, we have a good mixture of the things that we've done in the past, mixed in with things that, are possible change-ups along the way, based on how they attack us.
Steven, defense has played as well as you could ask. Both Tennessee and Oregon, that defense dominated.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, it starts with the offense, weirdly enough, because I think the offense has been setting up the defense to be as aggressive as it possibly can because it's building big leads and it's putting teams in situations where they can't run the ball. When you're down 21-0 after a quarter, when you're down 17-0 after a quarter, you can't run the ball. You've got to throw it because you've got to get back into this game. And what that's allowing Jim Knowles to do is deviate resources to the back end, keeping things in front and allowing these defensive ends and these defensive tackles to tee off on quarterbacks. And as a result, we're seeing the best versions of Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau that we've seen since they've been here. JT Tuimoloau has 10 sacks this year. Well, 4 of them have come in the college football playoff. Jack Sawyer has 8 sacks this year. Well, 3.5 of them have come in the college football playoff. JT Tuimoloau, this is the first time we've seen a double-digit sack guy at Ohio State since Chase Young had 16.5 back in 2019. Jack Sawyer, with his 8, Cody Simon's got 7, and I think 3 of his have come in the college football playoff. They have been put into a position where, because the offense has done its job, the defense can be aggressive and dictate what the offense is doing for its opponent. It's allowing them to tee off on guys, while also Jim Knowles has tweaked some things enough and put some of his best players in the position to make plays. Guys like Caleb Downs, who's a free safety, who a lot of times it looks like he's pseudo playing middle linebacker. You've seen Sonny Styles continue to develop. You've seen a cornerback rotation of Denzel Burke, Davidson Igbinosun, and Jermaine Matthews. That's been stout. Lathan Ransom and Jordan Hancock have been amazing as 2 safeties back there as well. But the defense has been elite. This is the best defense in the country. But the offense being aggressive and putting the pedal to the metal and putting the pressure on its opponents to score is allowing Ohio State's defense to be just as aggressive and making it a very, very difficult task for opponents to be able to do just that.
All right, so when you look at this one, you win this, you're in the national championship game. Keys for Ohio State against Texas.
Do the same thing you did the first 2 games. That doesn't mean run the same plays, but it does mean establish your best players as quickly as possible. Nobody has an answer for Jeremiah Smith yet. Don't bail Texas out. Make them find an answer for Jeremiah Smith. Make them find an answer for Carnell Tate. Make them find an answer for Emeka Ibuka. Because then once they start scrambling for that answer, that's when you can hit them with Quinshon Judkins. That's when you can hit them with Travion Henderson. Even G. Scott, the tight end, who has a wide receiver background, has been pretty stout for you as well. We haven't seen Will Howard be a running threat yet. Maybe this is the game against a zone team who likes to drop 8 a lot. This is the game you see that. But continue to be aggressive, continue to dictate the tempo, continue to dictate how this game goes, and that goes on offense and it goes on defense. Do not let Texas dictate offensively or defensively how this game is going to be played. Ohio State needs to be doing that and taking the fight to Texas, especially with a game that's in Dallas, Texas, which is essentially Longhorn land.
All right, what concerns you most about Texas? In other words, what's their path to figuring a way to beat Ohio State?
One team is still trying to find that spark while the other team's trying to hold on to it. And the playoffs are going to be a difficult task of watching a team and which team can hold on to that for 4 straight games. And Ohio State's done it 2 out of the 4 now. Can they make it 3 out of the 4? As I mentioned earlier, we haven't seen Will Howard make mistakes yet in this playoff. Is he due for a bad mistake? But what happens after that mistake? How does he respond to that mistake? But then from an X's and O's standpoint, the offensive line has looked stout the first 2 weeks. You have to give credit where credit is due. Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, and offensive line coach Justin Fry have found a formula that works for a group that has been hindered by injuries. But it's still a question mark of whether or not at one point it's going to catch up to them in a game against an elite defensive line. I think Oregon's the best defensive line they're going to play the entire college football playoff. But Texas has got some guys too. Their interior guys are pretty good. They've got the freshman of the year in Colin Simmons, and I know I say that facetiously. The real freshman of the year is Jeremiah Smith, but Colin Simmons actually won the award for it. They got a stout secondary, and this is the best passing defense in college football. this is not the game to have a letdown. And so you have to be on alert for a letdown, but then also, what if this is the game where the offensive line finally gives out? I don't believe either of those things will happen, but you have to continue to keep an eye on them because those are the two things at this point that could keep Ohio State from winning a national title.
Stephen Means, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Stephen.
Anytime.
Stephen Means, make sure you check him out. Great Buckeyes coverage for the Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.